Hey, this is Ciderhelm, and this is my guide to Oracle Aleria in Greenscale's Blight. Where Duke Latarius was a basic raid check and Infiltrator Jolin was a DPS check, Oracle Aleria is an individual responsibility check. Players who are not paying attention will wipe the raid. This is certainly the easiest of the Greenscale encounters, provided your tanks have moderate gearing and players will do their job. If possible, have at least one tank who is a rogue. Oracle Aleria is a two-phase encounter. During the first phase, you will need to kill 2 werewolves, one of which is a melee hitter and one of which does powerful area attacks. Additionally, these adds must be killed at the same time or the other add will enrage. For this reason, DPS should be split up, with melee DPS focusing on the melee add and range DPS focusing on the other. Additionally, the other add should be kited to avoid massive damage. This encounter is very simple, but has a lot of emphasis on positioning that you can't easily see from my perspective in the video, so I'm going to be explaining it with diagrams before going into the kill video. Oracle's room is surrounded by 4 hedges, separated by small gaps that you enter from. At the hedge gap facing the boss, the add on the right is the melee add, which will be marked as 1 in this diagram, and the add on the left is the ranged add, which will be marked as 2 in this diagram. As a warrior tank, I will tank the melee add against the wall on our left. Positioning is relative, and you can swap this up however you want with no impact on the encounter. The entire raid should be stationed directly behind this add, both to avoid damage from the ranged add, but also to assist with necrotic energy, a mechanic I will be explaining shortly. The second tank, ideally a rogue, should start with his add near the back wall, as far away from the raid as possible. While it is not absolutely essential to kite this add, healing requirements are very punishing if the tank tries to do this encounter without kiting. We choose a rogue for tanking this add due to the variety of blink abilities they can use to keep moving away from the add. If you're not using a rogue, you can gain some advantage by charging Aleria in the middle to get some distance. While the kiting tank does need to secure aggro in the beginning of the encounter, the werewolf stays relatively locked on the kiting tank. The tank should try to get some attacks in, but stay focused on movement and survivability. During both Phase 1 and 2, wisps will spawn from the corners. During Phase 1, these wisps will only spawn from the 2 close corners. These will move to the melee werewolf and begin casting a buff on him. They need to be killed before they reach him. If they're not killed, they will add a stack of a damage buff to the wolf. We found it was most effective to identify DPS to handle these wisps. For close wisps, we used a warrior on each corner who would bring it down. The wisps would be low as they reach casting range, and cleave damage from other melee were able to finish off adds that didn't quite make it down. In Phase 2, these wisps come from all 4 corners and move to Aleria. We assigned 1 rogue for each of the far wisps, and because of the extra travel distance, they were usually killed before they could cast their buff. The buff is powerful, and if it stacks too high, the raid will wipe. However, in our kills, there usually are a few stacks, and it's not the end of the world if it happens. Don't stress out, but if you reach 5 or 6 stacks, make sure you're using cooldowns. If you're having problems with these stacks, you can have more people switch over and handle the adds, or have everyone in the raid do so. It's very inefficient to do this, and can be dangerous with the DPS timer, but it may be necessary. The final ability your raid needs to watch out for throughout the encounter is necrotic energy. When this debuff is placed on a player, a raid announcement will appear on everyone's screen. This player needs to move out between the hedge gap and get fully behind a hedge, blocking line of sight between them and the rest of the raid. After 8 seconds, anyone who is still in line of sight of this player will be instantly killed. As mentioned earlier, this is why we keep the raid close to the hedge and the melee boss throughout the encounter. Doing this lowers runtime for players. Once you're behind the hedge, make sure you have some distance between the hedge on each side and don't hug the hedge closest to the raid. We've had several wipes with people clearly on the correct side of the hedge, but hugging it, and the raid was still hit by the bomb. While we're not sure if it was a blind chance or just bad luck, we have not had problems since we started making sure to leave some room between hedges on both sides when we go and LOS the debuff. It's important to note that the melee tank in Phase 1 can be targeted by necrotic energy, as you'll see in this movie. When this occurred, the boss stayed stationary near the corner until I returned, which wasn't nearly as catastrophic as we expected. During Phase 1, the werewolf can put a 75% healing debuff on the tank. This can be tank switched, but can also just be healed through since the werewolf deals relatively little damage. Phase 2 begins once both adds are down. This is largely the same encounter as before, and most of the mechanics were mentioned earlier in this guide. However, some things to keep in mind during this encounter are a powerful AoE Oracle Aleria will deal to everyone in the raid. After this AoE, healers should remember to stay focused on the tank's health. During Phase 2, Oracle Aleria will do the same healing debuff as the werewolf on Phase 1. However, we've noticed that it can frequently go on to players other than the current tank. While we don't know what the exact mechanic that causes this is, it happens more frequently to tanks, which suggests it may be threat-related. Regardless, anytime the healing debuff goes on the current tank, the other tank should taunt off and pick Aleria up. This is genuinely an easy encounter by comparison to both Jolin and the encounters that follow Aleria. Just keep your raid focused on the necrotic energy and you'll be fine. Thanks for listening to this guide from Eventide on Deepwood. If you'd like to talk with us, check out the guild site at www.eventideguild.com.